Have you ever witnessed a moment when 3 decades of suffering transformed into something beyond human comprehension? Where freedom unleashed emotions so profound, they challenged everything we thought we knew about animal consciousness. Deep in Thailand's countryside, wildlife rangers' mission to liberate an elephant from circus chains would reveal a reaction so haunting, so emotionally devastating, that it would forever change how we understand the psychological depths of these magnificent creatures and the true cost of captivity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Deep within Thailand's Chiang province, where ancient temples rise from misty jungle valleys and golden rice paddies stretch toward distant mountains, lies a landscape that embodies both Southeast Asia's natural beauty and its darkest secrets regarding wildlife exploitation. This region encompasses thousands of square kilometers, where legitimate elephant sanctuaries operate alongside illegal entertainment operations that have commodified magnificent creatures for decades of systematic abuse. The countryside pulses with contradictions. Pristine forests where wild elephants roam freely mere kilometers from concrete compounds where their captive relatives endure lives of unimaginable suffering. Ancient teak trees create natural cathedrals that echo with the calls of free-roaming giants, while hidden behind tourist facades, cramped facilities house elephants, whose spirits have been systematically broken through decades of forced performances and brutal training methods. But northern Thailand also harbors hope in the form of conservation heroes who dedicate their lives to exposing and dismantling these operations. Hidden within this complex landscape are wildlife rangers whose dangerous missions challenge criminal enterprises that view endangered animals as profit sources rather than sentient beings deserving of freedom and dignity. What was about to unfold in this ancient kingdom would prove that sometimes liberation after decades of captivity unleashes emotions so profound they transcend every scientific understanding of animal psychology. This was a story that would challenge fundamental assumptions about the emotional lives of elephants, and demonstrate that freedom given after 30 years of chains creates responses that haunt witnesses forever. The extraordinary events that were about to transform both rescuer and rescued would prove that in humanity's darkest moments of exploitation, heroes emerge with the courage to fight for justice regardless of personal cost. But what happened when 3 decades of suffering finally encountered genuine compassion, the haunting reaction that would leave everyone speechless, would reveal depths of elephant consciousness and emotional complexity that science was only beginning to comprehend. This is where our story begins, in a place where ancient wisdom meets modern cruelty, and where one elephant's liberation would unleash something so beautiful and heartbreaking that it would forever change how we understand the true cost of captivity. The embodies, operating in the dangerous front lines of Thailand's wildlife conservation battle, worked Captain Circus Nakamura, a Thai-Japanese wildlife ranger whose 8-year crusade against illegal elephant exploitation had earned her both national recognition and death threats from criminal organizations profiting from animal suffering. Standing just over 5.5 feet with calloused hands bearing scars from countless rescue operations, her dark eyes reflected the accumulated determination of someone who had witnessed both humanity's worst cruelties and its most profound capacity for redemption. Captain Nakamura's specialized rescue unit operated from a converted military transport that served as both mobile veterinary clinic and tactical command center, equipped with heavy-duty equipment for dismantling restraint systems alongside specialized medical supplies for treating traumatized elephants. Her fluent command of regional dialects and deep understanding of criminal networks had allowed her to infiltrate entertainment operations that other authorities couldn't penetrate, documenting atrocities that would otherwise remain hidden behind Thailand's lucrative tourism industry. But it was her personal connection to elephant psychology that truly drove her dangerous mission. Having spent 6 years studying the complex emotional lives of Asian elephants, Captain Nakamura understood that these magnificent creatures possessed cognitive abilities and emotional depths that made their exploitation through forced entertainment not just conservation crimes, but profound moral atrocities against sentient beings. Deep within the illegal circus compound that Captain Nakamura was about to infiltrate lived Misty, a 43-year-old female Asian elephant whose name meant flower in Thai, a heartbreaking irony for a creature who hadn't seen natural vegetation in 3 decades. Captured as a 13-year-old adolescent when her family was killed by poachers, The magnificent elephant had spent 30 years performing tricks and giving rides to tourists who remained oblivious to her suffering. Mali's once powerful frame now showed the accumulated damage of 3 decades of systematic abuse, chronic foot problems from standing on concrete, psychological disorders from constant chaining, and the hollow eyes of a creature whose natural behaviors had been suppressed through punishment-based training methods that broke spirits while maintaining profitable compliance. This barely contained despair, simmering beneath years of forced performances and brutal conditioning, would prove crucial to the haunting liberation about to unfold, an event that would demonstrate the profound emotional complexity of elephants and the devastating psychological cost of prolonged captivity. That sweltering Monday morning settled over northern Thailand's countryside, with the oppressive humidity that characterized the region's dry season. As Captain Nakamura conducted her final reconnaissance preparations from a concealed position 2 kilometers from the illegal circus compound, her converted military transport sat camouflaged among abandoned farm equipment, its surveillance systems powered down to avoid electronic detection by the facility's security networks. The wildlife ranger had spent months establishing her cover identity as a corrupt tourism official willing to overlook regulatory violations in exchange for financial compensation. This carefully constructed persona had finally earned her access to tonight's private performance, providing the opportunity she needed to document conditions and plan the complex liberation operation that would require perfect timing and flawless execution. Captain Nakamura methodically checked her specialized equipment: bolt cutters designed for heavy chains, emergency medical supplies for treating traumatized elephants, and communication devices that would coordinate with the tactical support team waiting at predetermined extraction points. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, despite the weight of knowing that any technical failure could mean death not just for herself, but for the magnificent creature trapped within the compound's reinforced walls. 2 kilometers away, within the circus facility's main building, Mali endured another morning of pre-performance preparation with the resigned despair that had become her existence for 3 decades. The magnificent elephant swayed rhythmically within her concrete stall, her massive frame confined by heavy chains that had worn permanent grooves into her legs and created chronic wounds that never fully healed. The illegal entertainment facility operated with the efficiency of a machine designed to extract maximum profit from animal suffering. Armed guards monitored perimeter fences while wealthy tourists arrived in air-conditioned buses, their cameras ready to capture exotic performances without questioning the methods used to train wild creatures into compliance. For Mei Li, this morning represented 10,000 identical preparations: forced bathing in chlorinated water, application of cosmetic paint to hide injury marks, and psychological conditioning designed to suppress natural behaviors in favor of entertainment routines that delighted audiences while destroying her spirit incrementally. Neither Captain Nakamura nor Malay could know that this routine morning was about to explode into events that would challenge every assumption about the psychological complexity of elephants and the profound emotional consequences of prolonged captivity. Captain Nakamura's carefully planned infiltration was shattered when her surveillance revealed something that made her blood freeze with horror. Tonight wasn't just another tourist performance, but a retirement ceremony where elephants who had outlived their entertainment value would be systematically disposed of for insurance claims. The intercepted radio communications made it clear that Mali was scheduled for euthanization tonight, not because of illness, but because her aging body could no longer perform the demanding tricks that generated maximum tourist revenue. The criminal organization had grown tired of the elephant's increasing medical costs and her occasional displays of resistance during performances, viewing her as a financial liability rather than a sentient being who had generated millions in revenue over 3 decades of forced entertainment. Tonight's event would feature a fabricated medical emergency that would justify her killing, while allowing the operators to collect insurance payouts. Through her concealed position, Captain Nakamura could see the compound's veterinary area being prepared for the procedure. Additional restraints had been installed to prevent Mali from defending herself, while falsified medical documentation was being prepared to create legal justification for what amounted to cold-blooded murder of a creature whose only crime was growing old in captivity. The discovery that tonight represented Mali's planned execution transformed Captain Nakamura's mission from documentation to emergency rescue, despite the impossible odds and certain deadly consequences of premature intervention. Her hidden cameras had already captured enough evidence to expose the entire operation, but that evidence would mean nothing if she allowed the magnificent elephant to be killed while she watched from safety. Radio intercepts revealed the compound's security protocols and shift schedules, providing crucial intelligence about guard positions and communication patterns that might allow a single infiltrator to reach Mali's holding area undetected. But the same communications made it clear that any security breach would trigger immediate lockdown procedures designed to eliminate both intruders and evidence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Captain Nakamura found herself facing the most impossible decision of her career: abandon her covert mission to save one elephant while potentially allowing the criminal enterprise to continue operating, or risk everything in a rescue attempt that would almost certainly result in death for both rescuer and captive. The sounds of arriving veterinary personnel indicated that Mei's execution was scheduled to begin within the hour. As Captain Nakamura infiltrated the compound's holding areas using maintenance tunnels mapped during weeks of surveillance, the scene that greeted her was every conservationist's worst nightmare, multiplied by 3 decades of systematic cruelty. Mali's concrete stall had been designed not just for containment, but for psychological destruction. Electrified barriers that prevented natural movement, automated noisemakers that disrupted sleep cycles, and strategically positioned lights that created constant stress through sensory overload. The magnificent elephant showed the accumulated damage of 30 years of deliberate brutalization. Her once powerful frame had been reduced to chronic pain and barely contained despair, while fresh injection marks across her flanks indicated recent preparation sessions designed to sedate her for tonight's planned execution. Most disturbing were her eyes, intelligent orbs that reflected not the noble wisdom typical of elephants, but something far more heartbreaking: complete resignation to whatever cruelty humans chose to inflict upon her. What made Mali's condition truly devastating was the evidence of her psychological transformation. This wasn't simply an abused animal awaiting rescue. This was a 6-ton creature whose natural behaviors had been systematically suppressed through 3 decades of punishment-based training that had replaced instinctive responses with learned helplessness. The methodical swaying of her massive head and the way she flinched at every human sound suggested trauma responses that went far beyond normal stress reactions. Around Mali's stall, Captain Nakamura could see evidence of the compound's other retirement candidates: reinforced enclosures containing elderly elephants and other performing animals in various stages of psychological breakdown. The entire facility represented a factory designed to extract maximum profit from magnificent creatures until their bodies could no longer generate revenue, at which point they became disposal problems requiring permanent solutions. The most chilling aspect of the operation was its industrial efficiency. Every element had been calculated to maximize both animal productivity and disposal convenience, from the facility's location near crematoriums to the legal documentation that would justify Mali's killing as necessary veterinary intervention. This wasn't casual cruelty. It was systematic exploitation engineered by individuals who had abandoned every principle of human decency. As Captain Nakamura approached Mali's stall with her improvised cutting equipment, the elephant's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that conveyed both desperate hope and terrified expectation of additional suffering. Yaka. Standing before Mali's reinforced stall, Captain Nakamura found herself confronting an impossible moral equation that transcended every principle of wildlife rescue she had learned throughout her career. This wasn't a simple case of liberating an abused animal. This was potentially unleashing a 6-ton creature whose psychological programming had been deliberately designed through 30 years of systematic trauma that had replaced natural behaviors with learned helplessness and profound despair. The wildlife ranger's tactical mind raced through the brutal mathematics of intervention versus abandonment. Mali's eyes reflected 3 decades of systematic torture that had transformed natural elephant intelligence into something far more heartbreaking: complete resignation to human cruelty, combined with the physical capabilities to accidentally cause devastating harm simply through panic responses. Every movement the elephant made suggested barely contained trauma responses that could explode unpredictably if triggered by sudden environmental changes. Yet something deeper than logic was driving Captain Nakamura's response. The magnificent creature's obvious intelligence made her suffering even more devastating. This wasn't just physical captivity, but psychological warfare against a being whose cognitive abilities allowed her to understand exactly what was being done to her and why. The deliberate nature of her torture spoke to protective instincts that had nothing to do with professional conservation obligations and everything to do with basic human decency. The most terrifying aspect of the situation was the complete unpredictability of Mei's response to liberation. Would she flee immediately toward freedom, or would 30 years of conditioned helplessness prevent her from recognizing that escape was possible? Captain Nakamura possessed no way to predict or control the psychological responses of a traumatized elephant whose natural behavioral patterns had been deliberately perverted through decades of systematic abuse. The sounds of veterinary personnel preparing execution equipment indicated that Mei's killing was approaching rapidly, leaving no time for gradual rehabilitation or careful psychological assessment. This was a binary choice between certain death through abandonment and potential catastrophe through liberation. Captain Nakamura found herself crossing a psychological boundary that separated professional wildlife conservation from personal moral crusade. The sight of Mei's systematic torture and the knowledge of her scheduled execution was triggering responses she couldn't ignore, even if intervention meant unleashing forces beyond human control or prediction. Captain Nakamura transformed from passive observer to active catalyst when she made the calculated decision that witnessing systematic execution was morally equivalent to participating in murder. Her 8 years of wildlife conservation experience had taught her that some acts of mercy require abandoning professional protocols in favor of immediate action, regardless of consequences that couldn't be predicted or controlled by conventional rescue methods. Working with practiced efficiency born of countless emergency interventions, Captain Nakamura approached Mei's stall with specialized cutting equipment adapted from her tactical gear. The magnificent elephant's initial reaction was predictable. 30 years of human cruelty had taught her that bipedal approach meant pain, and she pressed herself against the stall's far wall with muscles tensed for whatever additional suffering was about to be inflicted upon her traumatized body. But Captain Nakamura possessed something the circus operators had never shown: genuine compassion combined with profound respect for the creature's intelligence and dignity. Speaking in soft Thai while maintaining non-threatening body language, she began the delicate process of earning minimal trust from a creature who had every reason to view all humans as enemies deserving immediate defensive responses or complete withdrawal. The breakthrough moment came when Captain Nakamura began dismantling the electrified barriers and automated torture devices rather than approaching Mei directly. The elephant's intelligent eyes tracked these actions with analytical precision that suggested she understood exactly what liberation meant and what opportunities it would provide for either escape or the expression of 30 years of accumulated rage against those who had systematized her suffering. Using her tactical tools with surgical precision, Captain Nakamura disabled the electrified restraint systems and automated stress mechanisms that had made Mei's existence a constant nightmare of psychological torture. Each deactivated device seemed to register with the traumatized elephant, whose breathing patterns shifted from defensive hypervigilance to something approaching cautious hope. The critical moment arrived when the stall's main restraint chains yielded to Captain Nakamura's specialized cutting equipment. As the heavy links fell away for the first time in 30 years, Mei didn't move immediately toward freedom as expected. Instead, she remained motionless, her intelligent eyes fixed on her liberator with an intensity that made Captain Nakamura's heart race with both anticipation and terror. The moment Mei stepped from her concrete prison, what followed defied every protocol in wildlife rescue manuals and challenged fundamental assumptions about traumatized elephant behavior. Instead of fleeing immediately toward freedom or collapsing from psychological overload, the magnificent creature demonstrated cognitive complexity that left Captain Nakamura both amazed and deeply moved by the implications of what she was witnessing. Mei moved with deliberate caution rather than instinctive panic, her massive frame trembling not with fear but with what could only be described as overwhelming emotional release. This wasn't random trauma response. This was systematic processing of sensory information that suggested 30 years of forced performances had not destroyed her natural intelligence, merely suppressed it beneath layers of learned helplessness and conditioned compliance. Captain Nakamura quickly activated her emergency beacon to alert wildlife authorities and law enforcement to the compound's location, knowing that Mei's liberation would trigger immediate security responses from heavily armed circus operatives. Her satellite communication equipment transmitted coordinates and evidence files that would ensure prosecution of the criminal enterprise, regardless of what happened during the next critical minutes. But as Captain Nakamura prepared to guide Mei toward the compound's perimeter where freedom awaited, the liberated elephant made a decision that would haunt everyone who witnessed it. Instead of following the clear path to escape, Mei began moving deliberately toward each of the other captive animals in the facility, her massive trunk reaching through barriers to make gentle contact with creatures who had shared her decades of suffering. The magnificent elephant seemed to understand that her liberation was meaningless unless it included her fellow prisoners. Her movements displayed coordination between memory, empathy, and tactical intelligence that suggested she had been planning this moment throughout her years of captivity, waiting for the opportunity to transform from victim into liberator of every creature trapped within the compound's walls. Captain Nakamura found herself witnessing behavior that challenged every assumption about elephant psychology and moral complexity. This wasn't simple escape behavior. This was systematic rescue operation, being conducted by a creature whose cognitive abilities had been underestimated by those who viewed her as mere entertainment property. The sounds of approaching security personnel created urgency that seemed to motivate Mei toward even more determined rescue efforts for her fellow captives. What unfolded next would be remembered as one of the most haunting displays of elephant consciousness and emotional intelligence ever documented. As law enforcement helicopters approached in the distance, Mei's response to her first taste of freedom after 30 years created a moment so profoundly moving that it would forever change how witnesses understood the psychological depths of these magnificent creatures. Standing in the compound's central courtyard with chains finally removed from her legs, Mei began exhibiting behavior that no wildlife expert had ever witnessed. The traumatized elephant raised her massive trunk toward the open sky and released a sound that transcended normal elephant vocalizations, a deep, resonant call that seemed to carry 3 decades of suppressed emotions in a single, earth-shaking expression. Then came the moment that would haunt Captain Nakamura forever. Mei began to weep, not the simple moisture that elephants naturally produce, but genuine tears streaming down her massive face as she processed the overwhelming reality that her suffering had finally ended. Her entire 6-ton frame shook with sobs that spoke of emotions so profound they challenged every scientific understanding of animal consciousness. But the most haunting aspect of Mei's reaction was what happened next. Despite her freedom, despite the open gates leading to sanctuary, the magnificent elephant refused to leave the compound until every other captive animal had been liberated. She positioned herself protectively near the remaining cages, using her massive bulk to shield weaker creatures, while rescue teams worked to free tigers, bears, and other performing animals. As each animal was released, Mei would gently touch them with her trunk in what could only be described as blessing or encouragement, as if she understood that freedom after prolonged captivity required emotional support as much as physical liberation. Her actions demonstrated empathy and moral complexity that forced everyone present to reconsider what they thought they knew about animal intelligence. When the final cage was opened and all creatures were free, Mei turned toward the forest with dignified grace, her massive form silhouetted against the setting sun as she took her first steps toward the wild sanctuary where she would spend her remaining years healing from 3 decades of systematic cruelty. In the aftermath of Mei's haunting liberation, the illegal circus was permanently shut down, and its operators prosecuted under international wildlife protection laws. Captain Nakamura's documentation became crucial evidence that led to the rescue of hundreds of other captive animals across Southeast Asia and the dismantling of an entire network of entertainment facilities built on systematic cruelty. What happened that night challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and emotional complexity. Mei's tears and her refusal to abandon fellow captives demonstrated cognitive and moral capabilities that forced researchers to reconsider the psychological lives of elephants and their capacity for empathy, sacrifice, and profound emotional expression. Today, Mei thrives in a protected sanctuary where she has formed deep bonds with other rescued elephants, her story serving as both inspiration and haunting reminder of the psychological cost of prolonged captivity. Her reaction to freedom, those tears of overwhelming relief, and her compassionate protection of other victims, continues to haunt everyone who witnessed it, proving that some moments of liberation reveal depths of animal consciousness that forever change how we understand the creatures we share this planet with. In Thailand's ancient forests, where freedom finally conquered 3 decades of chains, one elephant's haunting response to liberty revealed the profound emotional lives hidden within magnificent creatures, whose capacity for both suffering and compassion rivals our own. Bays, Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.